What's up, everyone? Greg is here for an episode of Studying the Sharps. Welcome back for a second time, Greg. And we're going to basically cover all of the NBA futures before the All-Star break is over, with the season coming back tomorrow. So we can start anywhere here. What are you looking at right now as far as like the most intriguing betting market, team future, player future? I think we're going to kind of get to everything here, but where do you want to start? We'll just go with what you want.
So to me, the most interesting one is Defensive Player of the Year because I'm
Me too.
very sure that there's that because Draymond Green is plus 250 now, and we legitimately don't know if he's going to play or not for the rest of the season. At a minimum, he's out 3 to 4 weeks. And you and I have both been really high on Draymond Green. We've been looking at him at longer odds since the start of the season, basically. And I kind of thought he was a lock to win this award. But now that he's been out for so long, I don't think that's the case, nor do I even think he's going to get serious consideration unless he comes back soon. He's plus 250. So it seems to me that he's kind of off the table and there's value there and everybody else. I just don't know who the value guy is.
Yeah, I was excited to talk about Robert Williams when I was thinking about this yesterday, just 24 hours before we were recording the show. Robert Williams was 50 to 1 last
60
night.
to 1.
I think he was 61 2 days ago, but he was 51 last night, whatever, 50 or this morning. But he's only 25 now. So yeah, that kind of ruins it. I mean, I don't know if that's still good value anymore. Like, does Robert Williams have more than a 3 or 4% chance to win DPOY? Maybe. I think what's definitely clear from what you were saying is a lot can change over the final 2 months with this market. Like we're going to see players move just based on how they perform going forward. I mean, we saw Jaren Jackson surge way up the board. Robert Williams has moved up basically for no reason. I mean, it's more like everyone else who has good defensive numbers has either gotten injured or started playing worse. And he has good defensive numbers, so his odds have just improved. Just maybe the Celtics winning has a lot to do with it. But if you said that someone like, I don't know, I'm just scrolling way down here. Like, does Royce O'Neal have a crazy second half in terms of blocks and steals and become a value at 300 to 1? I don't really think it's worth betting any of these guys yet. But like, this is one where it's definitely worth paying attention to just to see if someone emerges. Like, what if Mitchell Robinson averages 2.5 or 3 blocks a game the rest of the way? He's 500 to 1. Like, do you think it's conceivable that someone with crazy odds, if we're looking at this 2 weeks from now, like, not that they're the favorite, but that they've emerged in the discussion?
Not really, just because it seems so up in the air. The other thing, too, is I think a lot of people now assume, oh, Rudy Gobert or Giannis. Neither the Jazz nor the Bucks have a good defense this year. And I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any one standout candidate, but wouldn't you think, and this is also going to be why I think that Robert Williams' numbers have increased so much, but don't you think the Defensive Player of the Year candidate, assuming that it's, generally going to be a big man, kind of has to anchor a good defense?
Yeah, I mean, this is also why I'm okay doing a show. This is normally a show where it's like, let's give holistic advice to help people make decisions going forward. And even though we're essentially giving picks for this, we still have to break down our process of how we come up with these things because we're kind of thinking through this on the fly. Sure, the Jazz defense hasn't been that good this year, but a lot of that is because Rudy Gobert wasn't playing.
Which also is the same issue with Draymond Green right now, and the Boston Celtics. A lot of because why they're winning, it's because of the defense. So if we look at the top defenses in the NBA right now by defensive efficiency, number 1 is the Warriors. But there's no Draymond Green. And
they've been a lot worse without him. I don't know if you have that exactly in front of you, but there's no question the defense has fallen off without him there.
Yeah, and I could pull that up also. But then number 2 is the Boston Celtics. That's where Robert Williams comes into play. 3 is the Phoenix Suns, which I do think that Mikal Bridges is a pretty realistic candidate, but his odds have dropped. 4 you have the Cleveland Cavaliers. So Evan Mobley's been an outstanding rookie. He's their best defensive player, but also Kevin Love has started to close games over him. So that's kind of an issue. Then 5 is the Dallas Mavericks. They don't have a clear Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Then you've got the Miami Heat. It would be Bam Adebayo, but he's also missed about half the year. So it's really hard to find somebody who is an actual good candidate and hasn't missed time. Or maybe people just look at the end of the year and say, hey, we don't want to vote for Rudy Gobert because nobody likes this guy anymore. We're tired of voting for him. The Warriors have the best defense in the league. Maybe people just give it to Draymond Green anyway because all the best candidates have missed games.
Do you have any insight on how the voting works for this particular award? Like how many people are voting? And then it's that weighted voting system, right? Where like first place is worth X number of points and so on
Yeah.
and so on. So it could be a situation where all of what you said is reasonable, and then everyone just has a different opinion, and then everything is so diluted that all it takes is some random guy to get like 3 extra votes because it's so spread out that, like, I really think that anyone could ultimately just sneak in and end up winning. I mean, Rudy Gobert probably deserves to be the favorite despite the voter fatigue, just because he's playing and Draymond's not, and Draymond's going to be out another month. Like it's probably just too many missed games for it really to be. It's not that it's unrealistic that Draymond wins. It's just he shouldn't be the favorite because he has a lot to overcome in terms of getting back on the court, and he's already missed so many games. But yeah, like the Cavs situation makes it really hard because Jared Allen's also there. So yeah, you're right. Evan Mobley losing playing time is not good for him in terms of awards. I think he'll still win Rookie of the Year despite that, but for defensive player, yeah, that's a problem. And then he has another shot blocker on his team who's really good with Jared Allen. There's just so many confounding variables. Like you could probably make a strong case or two against every single realistic candidate. And that's kind of why I'm thinking just like wait and see. Like if you had to bet someone right now, for me, it's probably someone in the Embiid, Bridges, Williams, Mobley tier. Like I don't think I want to bet anyone that's higher up. Is it the same for you, or are you even more conservative and cautious here, where you just don't want to bet on any of these people right now?
If I was being held captive and somebody said you absolutely have to bet defensive player of the year right now for whatever reason, it would be Mikal Bridges relative. And also for some reason, they want the best value. They don't just want who's going to win outright. They want the best value. It would be Mikal Bridges, just because I think we're also going to get to a point where we get to vote. The Suns are the best team in the league by a pretty wide margin right now. Not even really that debatable either. If you just look at the records, they're 6.5 games over the Warriors, who have the second best record in the NBA. And I think we're going to get to a point where people will just say, like, okay, what is it that's facilitated the Suns being so good? And I think part of it's going to be Monty Williams getting consideration for Coach of the Year. He's a pretty heavy favorite right now. But then part two is also going to be people are going to look at, oh, look how good this team's defense is. The offense has also obviously been really good, but we can't really give MVP consideration to Chris Paul, who's also out for a while. We can't give it to Devin Booker. So I think people might just lean back and say, hey, Mikal Bridges, one of the best, if not the best wing defenders in the NBA. They have a really good defense. So maybe that's where people go there. So if I had to pick somebody from a value stance, that's why I'd go Bridges.
So you think, like, because the same people are voting on all the awards, there are people who are going to default to Bridges because they didn't pick any Suns players elsewhere and just say, like, this team needs someone to win something because they're most likely, even without Chris Paul, going to finish with the best record in the NBA. So like that's part of it, right? Like this human element of people feel like the Suns need to have someone win something.
Yeah, and it's the same human element to where I don't think people want, if there's no other choice, people just vote for Rudy Gobert. But the same thing happened last year also with Giannis, where, you know, by the end of the year, Jokic had kind of separated himself, but there was a while where we didn't really know who a clear-cut MVP was, and nobody was listing Giannis even in like top 5 or anything like that in written articles in terms of who the most likely MVP candidates were, because people had this idea with Giannis, like, well, he's already won a couple of MVPs. He hasn't done anything in the playoffs. We can't give him another one. And I kind of think the same narrative is going to apply to Rudy Gobert here. But if everybody's going to be hurt or everybody's just going to be a shitty candidate, then I guess there's going to be no choice but for people to vote for Gobert.
Yeah, no, if I had to pick who wins right now, it's Gobert, but like it's well below 50%. It still is wide open. I think the Bridges call is a good one. I'm not sure if 20-1 is enough necessarily, but it'll be interesting too to see like how that Chris Paul injury affects the way people think of the Suns. Like if they keep winning at the rate they're winning, like maybe that is actually helpful for Bridges. I don't think Chris Paul's as good of a defender at this stage of his career as people think, but a lot of people think Chris Paul's really good at defense. So maybe if the Suns defense keeps up at the level it's been without him, then you have to think, okay, so how did they do that? And Bridges is clearly the answer to that question. So maybe the Chris Paul injury ends up actually helping Bridges win this award. So maybe I'm sold a little bit. I think if I had to rank who's most likely at this point, it's probably Gobert, then Draymond. Maybe Bridges should be ahead of Jaren Jackson. Jaren Jackson is just a weird case where it was like his odds moved up so far just as a product of everyone was out. Like that basically happened while Gobert was injured. And Giannis has been resting and sitting games. Like the Bucks defense has had a couple duds and like they've been losing and they may not even win their division. Ultimately, though, yeah, I think Bridges might be the right call as far as best value, but I'm not that excited about it, is really the point.
No, and I did bet him a few days ago, I think at 24-1. But it was once again just the thing where I'm looking at it, like, I think there has to be value here somewhere, and I just don't know who that guy is. And I settled on him. I think that's probably the most wide open race right now.
Okay, so let's move to your. I think this is your favorite pick for awards right now in Sixth Man of the Year with Kevin Love, who you were texting me about a couple months ago. He is now plus 2,500 on DraftKings. He is still third behind Kelly Oubre, and then Tyler Hero, of course, is the favorite. Do you think that? Well, you liked him when he was in the 60s, and that definitely was a good call. Do you think that we're kind of at a point where it's fair? Maybe he deserves to be ahead of Kelly Oubre and he should be second. Like probability wise, what do you think? Like maybe 5% chance it's Kevin Love, 95% chance it's Hero and no one else is really in it? Or does Kevin Love actually have more of a shot than that?
So I actually think it's like the number on Kelly Oubre is really weird to me. I think 17-1 is just inaccurate. I think if anybody from the Hornets wins, I think it's more likely to be Harrell than it is to be Oubre. But that aside, I think the number on Hero is way off. I don't think he should be minus 1,400. And a lot of this is going to ultimately come down to who are the voters for this award, because Tyler Hero is not played well as of late at all. He had a really, really terrible January. And also something to keep in mind, the Heat have been really banged up this year. Jimmy Butler's missed games. Kyle Lowry has missed games. They've had other role players that are in and out. The game before the All-Star break was the first time we saw the Heat healthy in a really long time. Do you know how many minutes Tyler Hero played in that game?
I'm going to guess 27. Is that
23?
Okay, because there are games. Eric Spoelstra does seem to go with a hot hand approach in the fourth quarter, where if Max Strus is playing well or if Gabe Vincent's playing well, those guys will close over Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero. I think Lowry generally always closes. Of course, Butler and Bam are always going to be on the court, but right, like it seems highly variable game to game. And if Hero does continue to struggle, like you're saying, like there's no reason why Gabe Vincent can't take his minutes if he's the guy playing better.
And even with so in January though, Hero only played less than 30 minutes in one game, and he was terrible throughout the month. So Hero averaged a little over 35 minutes per game in January. He shot 37% from the field. He shot 33% from three. He has not played well for an extended period of time. And I do think there's a realistic chance that in the second half of the season, unless he just starts playing better, obviously, if he plays better, all bets are off the table. Yeah. But at least for the last 2 months now, he's sucked. And even now you look at, okay, what has he done so far in this month? It's only been a few games, but they finally got everybody back. Tyler Hero is going to lose some minutes out to Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry missed about a month due to personal reasons. Jimmy Butler's frequently been out of the lineup. Bam Adebayo is out, which in itself, doesn't impact Tyler Hero directly other than, the Heat play some more small ball lineups then. So I think there's a chance after seeing Tyler Hero play 23 minutes last game, what he might only average 25 minutes per game the rest of the season. And based on his shooting numbers over the last couple of months, I don't really expect him to play all that well either.
Yeah. I mean, there's a weird thing where it may help a Sixth Man of the Year candidate if they get to start a little bit too. So like we could have games down the stretch where Butler and Lowry are resting, and that probably bolsters Hero's case, even if he's starting in those games. Like we saw this with Jalen Brunson too. He picked up a lot of traction for Sixth Man earlier this year when he moved into the starting lineup when Luka was hurt. But then he started enough games where it's like he's not a sixth man anymore. I don't think Hero is in danger of that. Like he's much more in danger of what you're talking about, where he just loses playing time outright. But I think we could see Hero play, 4 or 5 extra games in the starting lineup in the last 2 months of the season due to guys resting. And then his stats get inflated from there. And then he just runs away with it because his numbers, like his counting stats, are too good, even if his rate stats aren't that awesome. So like that probably is my biggest devil's advocate reason why I think Hero does keep his minutes, is because I don't think Butler and Lowry are going to play every game. Like, I just think there are going to be enough games where those guys are sitting where he keeps the minutes there. But to your point, like he's such a large favorite. and there are ways it could go wrong. So I guess the question is, do you think this is a two-man race? Like, it's basically, if Hero doesn't win, it's going to be because there's a narrative built around Kevin Love, and he's far more efficient despite playing way fewer minutes. Because to me, it doesn't, like, there's no way Jordan Clarkson's been good enough. And also voter fatigue with him, like, especially after last year where he sort of undeservingly got the sixth man. Like, I don't think Dennis Schroeder is not going to win. And we could go, Buddy Hield got traded and now he's a starter. Like, it's not, everyone has lost ground basically except Kevin Love. So this is a two-man race, right?
And Montrezl Harrell, because Harrell got traded at the deadline. He's playing a lot of minutes now, even though he's coming off the bench.
He's playing behind Mason Plumlee off the bench.
Yeah, but he's still playing. I'll bring up his box score.
He's definitely playing more minutes than Plumlee.
And I think he's been playing around 30 minutes per game as of late. So yeah, actually, so here are the last 3 games. Montrezl Harrell, and there's overtimes in here, but still 43 minutes, 34 minutes, 29 minutes in his last 3 games with the Hornets. The first game with them, he only played 22, but that was also his first game with the team, and probably just limited in some sense because it was his first game. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see 28 to 32 minutes per game for Montrezl Harrell off the bench for the stretch of the year. So I think there's 3 legitimate candidates. Tyler Hero, who I still think should be favored just based historically on what people vote for off the bench, is just points per game. But I don't think it should be minus 1,400. Kevin Love, the 25-1 number, I still think is the best value on the board, but it's way different than when it was 65-1, and I was texting you about it and tweeting about it a few weeks ago. The Kelly Oubre at 17-1, that makes no sense to me. Harold 65-1. I think he's the third best I think he's the third best candidate right now.
Yeah, I think we're kind of on the same page here, where we probably would both say, like, maybe I'm a little more optimistic on Hero just due to, like, my view of how Butler and Lowry will rest down the stretch. But I think maybe Hero deserves to be somewhere between 7-1 and 10-1. Not as big of a favorite as he is, but still a pretty big favorite. And then Kevin Love and Montrezl Harrell should both be like in the 15-20-1 range. There's like a bit of value on Love and potentially a lot of value on Harrell. I do like that call. So if we both had to pick someone now for this award, Harrell's really the guy who's most undervalued.
Yeah, and I mean, even though we're both going to say that Tyler Hero is the most, like, you just can't play him at minus 1,400. No. And if I had a vote right now, and this isn't even bias on my part, because I bet Tyler Hero when the season started at 8-1 to win 6th man of the year. But still, objectively, I have to look at the numbers. And Kevin Love just having a better season. He's been way more efficient. Even in less minutes, he is worth 4.6 win shares to 1.9 win shares for Tyler Hero. And doing that just a fraction of the playing time. He's played, about 33% less minutes. He's just been that much better when he's on the court.
Okay, so you're using Basketball Reference win shares there. We're going to need to come back to that when we go to MVP. I kind of want to save that one for the end, but we're going to need that statistic and probably many other to break that award down. Okay, so the next 2 awards, and then I want to do the team future. Basically, we're going to go most improved and rookie of the year, move over to teams, and then come back to MVP. I think that to map out what we're talking about here makes some sense to just go that route. These next 2 are probably going to be quicker. Like rookie of the year, does Mobley just have this barring injury, or is there a way that someone passes him even if he is healthy?
I think he pretty much has it. Like I hedged a little bit with Cade Cunningham once because you and I we were both on Evan Mobley at the start of the year.
He was 14-1 to start the season with.
Yeah, and
in hindsight, it's like, why didn't that should have been a much heavier bet.
He's also hit a little bit of a rookie wall as of late. So we've seen his efficiency drop as of late, and Kevin Love has started to close some games over him. So that's a little bit of a concern. But at the same time, too, I just think Evan Mobley has the narrative here. The Cleveland Cavaliers went for a team that was terrible last year. One of the reasons they were able to get Evan Mobley to now being legitimately one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. And a lot of it has to do because of Evan Mobley's defense. So he's going to win at this point. Like you said, barring injury. So if he was to get hurt, then I'd feel good about the value on Cade. I did, like I said, I hedged with Cade a little while ago, and I kind of regret doing it. I think it was just throwing away money. So Evan Mobley's going to win, I think.
Yeah. Well, also, there's a bit of luck involved there too. Cade missed a couple games, I think, after that. He's been dealing with some nagging injuries. There was probably a point where there was value on Josh Giddey, but he's down to 11-1 on DraftKings. So yeah, there's no way he's like 10% to win. I think Mobley is well above 80 at this point, maybe just like a few percent for everyone else. So, okay, most improved. I don't really have a good feel for this. I mean, you can't bet John Morant at minus 550 at this point. He's like way inflated. I do think he's going to win, but Anthony Simons is probably the interesting person to talk about here just because of the usage and the counting stats that he's put up in the absence of basically everyone on this team. Most notably Lillard getting hurt and then McCollum getting traded. Do you think 30-1 is still potentially a value on him? Like to me, I don't know. It seems like a lot of people want Miles Bridges to win this award or think he has a good shot. It doesn't, like if you're going to pick a player who was already good and took a step forward, to me that's just John Morant. Like anyone who's viewing the award as that is probably just picking Morant. So to me the only other way that Morant doesn't win is if like Garland or Murray, who have really broken out this year, or Simons, who has just gone from basically nobody to 25 points a game or whatever he's going to do the second half of the year.
Yeah, so if we just look at the recent winners, I think there's a couple prerequisites that we could kind of put out for what has to happen for these guys to win, at least relative to the other results. So the last 5 winners are Julius Randle, Brandon Ingram, Pascal Siakam, Victor Oladipo, Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I think the number one thing that we have to consider is the player has to make the All-Star game, I think. They have to make the All-Star game, and they have to make the All-Star game for the first time. And that to me is going to be the number one thing I look at. And John Morant fits the criteria. Miles Bridges does not. Darius Garland does. DeJounte Murray does. And then I also think an element is still going to come down to team success and how much did their improvement ultimately help the team win. And that's where I kind of think DeJounte Murray gets left out, because as great as he's been this year, the Spurs aren't particularly good, and they're not going to be in the playoff mix. They're not going to be in the play-in game in all likelihood. So with that in mind, I kind of think we're looking at Morant or Garland. And based on the odds, I would rather bet Garland. But once again, Garland was much longer odds not that long ago. And now I think it's probably closer to fair. If I had to bet somebody, it would be Garland, but I'm not betting him at 12-1 right now.
Okay, so with Simons, it's really just that like voters don't want to vote for this kind of player where he went from he's probably made the most relevant leap forward, but he's still not good enough to get consideration just based on how this is traditionally voted for. So yeah, I think you're right that it's Garland should be ahead of Bridges. The thing that's interesting with Morant though, is I don't actually think he matters that much for the Grizzlies' success. Like this is something we've been talking about throughout the season where like Tyus Jones and DeAnthony Melton and Desmond Bane and Kyle Anderson, and I guess Dylan Brooks to a lesser extent, he's also injured, but like the Grizzlies are good because of their depth. And in games where John Morant doesn't play, the betting line basically doesn't even budge. Like he's not, in terms of analytics, John Morant is almost irrelevant to the success of the Memphis Grizzlies. But the perception is that he's very relevant because they're so much better this year than they've been, and he's gotten a lot better. So like, first of all, do you still like, are you on the same page as me at this point where like the Grizzlies backup guards could easily just fill in? Like if he was out for the season, they'd probably just continue. But at the same time, like the voters don't care about that. They're still going to vote for Morant.
No, for this reason. The reason the lines didn't move when he was out is because every game was weird. He had that stretch where he was out, and then it was like, oh, well, they're playing the Heat, but Jimmy Butler gets scratched. Then it's, oh, they're playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the Thunder resting SGA and Josh Giddey in the same game. And then the Grizzlies go out and they win that game by an NBA record, was like 70 points or something ridiculous like that. And they had this long stretch of games where every single time John Morant was out, teams were either resting players against Memphis or they just had an injury they were dealing with. And it happened like 7 games in a row. That and the schedule was really easy. So it was like they would have no John Morant, but they're playing against the Orlando Magic, and the Magic are missing players. It just kept happening like that.
Yeah.
So I don't actually buy
well,
that.
There's a quick thing on that. Like how many, if we got John Morant randomly scratched for a game against a good team, how many points do you think how many points get attributed to him? Like if it's totally out of the blue and they're facing, I don't know, let's say it's for the Minnesota game tomorrow. They're in Minnesota. They're fully healthy. Memphis is -2 right now. John Morant gets ruled out an hour before the game just for no reason. What's the line then? How far does it go?
Probably Minnesota -1.
So he's like 3 points.
Yeah, something along those lines.
And I think that's probably true, and it probably overvalues him a bit. Like maybe he should be worth 1.5 or 2. But still, like if you told the average person that Derek White is better or is more important to a point spread to a team winning games, or I don't know, there's probably 50 other players that we could say are worth more than 3 points to their team. Part of it is the quality of the backups, right? Because if you put Ja Morant on the Clippers and he's out for a Clippers game, and then like Brandon Boston has to fill in for him or something like that, like the reason he's not that valuable is because of the bench is so good, because Tyus Jones and DeAnthony Melton have been really good for the last couple of years. So that's really all I'm saying. Like, if people really considered what the impact of Morant is to that team, they would realize like he's not as Garland matters more, I think. Like point spreads will move more for Garland, even though he's probably a little bit worse. But the perception still, like the way that Morant has seemingly catapulted the Grizzlies to the top of the Western Conference. Like I still, despite all the things I'm saying, I think that ultimately wins out.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'm just looking through some of these games right now. So this was the stretch of games that they went on when Morant first got out. They played the Kings. The Kings didn't have Harrison Barnes. Then they played the Raptors. The Raptors didn't have OG Anunoby in that game. Then they played OKC. OKC sat SGA and Josh Giddey. Then they played Dallas. Dallas sat Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic in that game. Then they played Miami, and Miami was missing Bam Adebayo in that game. Then
I think they lost to the Heat in that one, despite that.
No, they beat the Heat.
Okay.
They did beat the Heat. Then they played Dallas again. That time Dallas had their guys, and then they ended up losing. The Grizzlies ended up losing. Then they play the Lakers, and that was a game they just won outright. Then they played the Houston Rockets. Whatever, the Rockets suck. They won that game. They played the Philadelphia 76ers, and Joel Embiid rested.
Right.
So it's hard to look at some of these on-off court numbers and put too much stock into them, because every single game that Morant was out, they were playing terrible teams on paper.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, though, like he sat against New Orleans last week, and Memphis, I think, ended up winning by like 15 on the road. And then the next night he comes back and they play at home against Portland. They lose the game.
Yeah.
So I get there are both sides to it for sure. We don't really know because, yeah, like you said, all these situations have been weird. But whatever, I still like, despite all of this, you can't bet Morant at minus 550 at this point for most improved. Like, there's no way that's a value. I think you're right on Garland. I think it's a good point that you laid out with like the Simons situation, or at least indirectly, where it's just like the player needs to be really good. It's not enough just to become an average player from nowhere. Making the All-Star game does seem to be really important. So no, that's definitely well said.
We could transition now to Coach of the Year, because there is still something I think that makes sense. If you're going to bet Garland, here's the situation where I think he wins, is if the Cavaliers just launch up the stand. If Garland keeps playing as well as he is, and the Cavaliers really start picking up steam, and it's not out of the realm of possibilities that they finish first in the Eastern Conference at this point. The East is very, very tight. And if that happens, I think Darius Garland could potentially win Most Improved, and JB Bickerstaff probably wins Coach of the Year in that scenario. DK does let you parlay these together. If you parlay JB Bickerstaff right now at plus 320 with Darius Garland at plus 1200 win Most Improved Player, that is that's 53-1. And I actually think that is a reasonable play.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like the bet, despite the fact that I think the Cavs are going to take a step back in the second half. Like, I just don't think Karis LeVert's that great. And I think the Bucks will probably get it together, and the Hawks are going to improve. Like, a lot of these other teams, I think, will start playing better. If the Nets get healthy, like, I think the Cavs might even wind up around the play-in game. But at the same time, there's a chance, just because of how bunched it is, that they end up as the 1 seed. Like, they really do have a shot to be the 1 seed or the 8 seed. So yes, 53-1 for that combination. I still like it, despite the fact that I'm probably a lot more bearish on Cleveland than most people. The Monty Williams dynamic with Chris Paul is also interesting, because I think we could see a case where, similar to defensive player, where if the Suns hold on to the 1 seed despite Chris Paul not being there, that's more points for Monty Williams, because he was able to keep the team at the top despite not having, the captain of the team, whatever you wanted to call Chris Paul, arguably their best player. But yeah, if the Cavs finish number 1 in the East, like, you almost have to give their coach of the year.
Yeah, and so that, to me also, I agree with what you said about Monty Williams. I think if the Suns are to hold on to the top seed, which they're most likely going to, they're 48-10 right now. So they've already played 58 games. They only have 24 games left, and they're 6.5 games ahead of the Warriors. Like, they would have to, and especially because the Warriors haven't had Draymond Green, they would really have to slide a lot in the standings for anybody to pass them. But with the Cavaliers, if the Cavaliers finish at the Cavaliers 6 weeks ago were 10-1 to make the playoffs on DraftKings. And now they're basically a lock to make the playoffs. There's not really a team that I think is too realistic, too many teams that are too realistic to move ahead of them. So I think if the Cavaliers do move up to the top seed, it would just be so unlikely relative to expectations coming into the season that I think that that's kind of the narrative that would win Coach of the Year, kind of like with Thibodeau last year.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like your bet. And then I also potentially think, well, I'm not sure what the odds are now, but like betting the Cavs to miss the playoffs, I think is also viable. Like there are a lot of ways it could go. I think the Eastern Conference, we would probably both say, just has a ton of variance right now. And just playing for outlier outcomes at high odds in all cases seems like the way to do it. Although I'm scanning here and yeah, here we go. You can bet plus 1,000 on Cleveland to miss the playoffs. Maybe that's not that exciting. I thought it'd be a little bit higher. You have to lay 25-1 on the yes at this point. But to your point, it's a lot more likely that they're in than it was earlier. So that's probably not where I want to attack it. But yeah, I think Bickerstaff probably is the best value right now. I don't really think going after a true long shot for that market makes a ton of sense. Okay, should we go to that division? I do want to like break down the divisions a little bit. Maybe that's, since we're already here, let's just go to the Central and the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, we could do that. And there's only 3 actual coaching candidates. It's Monty Williams, JB Bickerstaff, Taylor Jenkins.
Right.
If the Grizzlies were to somehow catch the Suns in the standings, then he would make sense, but probably not likely.
Yeah, there also are betting lines available for the number 1 seed. Like if that's what you're playing for, you could just bet Memphis plus 2,200 to be the number 1 seed. That's just way better value than betting on Jenkins. Or yeah, like it's 3-4 times the odds for essentially the same thing.
Yeah, I get behind that.
Okay, so the Central Division, we have 3 teams that are almost tied. My concern with Milwaukee, like I thought they were going to pull ahead of these other 2 teams. I like the Bulls are missing basically who I would refer to as their, well, I don't know. DeRozan's playing so well. I don't know if I want to call Lonzo Ball and Caruso their 2 best players anymore, but 2 of their top 3. We'll say DeRozan is in.
No. Levine and Vooch are still are having really good years as well.
Yeah, I mean, the defense is so significant for Caruso, especially on a team where no one else can really play defense, that I do think like his value is really understated. But anyway, like the Bulls are still decent, despite not having him and despite not having Lonzo Ball, and the Cavs are a decent team. The Bucks are objectively like they have to be the best team in the division, but they do have some of their own concerns. Like we still don't have Brook Lopez back. He's probably out for the year. And then they traded DiVincenzo right at the same time Pat Connaughton got injured. So now their wing depth is pretty thin to the point where DeAndre Bembry and Javon Carter are going to be part of this rotation. Do you think like the Bucks are plus 110 now? They're plus money for the first time this season. I'm not sure I even like this. Like I still think that they might be overvalued. What do you think here?
Yeah, I also think, I think they're overvalued. And at least as of right now, my biggest concern with the Bucks is that Chris Middleton has not been good this year. Yeah. And we're how many games into the season? And that's still the case. So, who knows, maybe he's dealing with lingering injuries that we aren't aware of. Maybe it's fatigue carried over from a long playoff run last year, but this is just not the same player as he was in previous years. And that starts to hurt them because this is the worst year that we've seen from Chris Middleton. And, ever since he had his breakout, he's shooting 43.8% from the field, 35.6% from 3. So it's all of his efficiency numbers are down. And then his turnovers are also at a career high. So those are all concerning things that we have Chris Middleton, who his playing time is down this year. Efficiency is down. Turnovers are up. These are all kind of red flags. Maybe also he's over the age of 30 now. Maybe he's kind of started to decline a little bit. But at least where the Bucks are at right now and what we've seen from them, I don't think they should be plus 110. I think they should be longer odds.
Yeah. So does that mean that there's a decent amount of value on either the Bulls or Cavs? To me, it's like the Bucks are a little overvalued, but ultimately this is pretty fair. Like, I think it's still a bit, maybe the Cavs at plus 300 are worth a shot. I think the Bulls now have corrected to the point where they're at the proper line at plus 170. I don't think the Bulls are worth betting right now. But again, like we can see results start to play out over the next, like kind of what we were talking about with the player awards. And, if these teams have head-to-head games and the odds don't adjust quickly enough for them, then there could be an opportunity just kind of waiting to see what happens. But Cleveland plus 300, I think probably has to be the most appealing thing here.
And one other thing that I think we have to mention in here, which is actually going to be another demerit against the Milwaukee Bucks, the most difficult remaining strength of schedule in the NBA is the Bucks by a pretty wide margin. The second most difficult strength of schedule is the Chicago Bulls.
Okay, is that by team winning percentage, the opponent's winning percentage? Okay. Yeah, I'm sure there are probably teams in there like the Hawks or something who are good but have a bad record. But still, like this is a pretty good indication of the strength of schedule.
So actually, the Bucks and Bulls, each of them, they're two of their easiest remaining opponents is the Hawks based on win percentage.
So it's harder than this metric probably even suggests.
Yes, whereas the Cavaliers, their worst opponents are the Pacers, 2 games against the Pistons, 2 games against the Magic, a game against the Knicks. The Cavaliers have one of the easiest remaining schedules in the conference going forward. So if I had to pick one team, it would be Cleveland. That, and also Cleveland has a very, very good defense, and that just has much less variance than a team that's built on offense or other factors. Like the Cavaliers have the best defense in that division by a pretty wide margin.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing too, I mean, despite how overrated I think Caris LeVert is, the Cavs are not resting players. I mean, Darius Garland was dealing with a back injury. He's probably fine now. Giannis is going to sit some games. Like he doesn't sit every back-to-back, but if it's 2 consecutive road games or a home and a road game, or even if it's back-to-back home games, but the first of the 2 was difficult, like went to overtime or down to the wire and he had to play big minutes, and I don't know, there were a lot of like hard fouls or something. Like he does sit the back-to-back sometimes, which I think is not true of these other 2 teams who are much younger. Like Giannis isn't old by any stretch, but I think because the Bucks have been there before, they won the championship last year, they're probably going to be a lot more cautious with him, and potentially with Middleton too, if he's dealing with something. So that's a point in favor of the Cavs for sure. Also, over in the Atlantic though, like I don't think anyone's resting because these teams all have to worry about getting in the playoffs and also trying to win the division. What do you think there? To me, like I don't see value here. Just to recap it quickly, Philly's minus 225, Boston's plus 340, Toronto's plus 750, and the Nets are now all the way down at plus 1300. I'm okay just kind of glossing over this one because I think this is kind of just appropriate, but do you see it differently at all?
No, I mean, it took so long for everybody to kind of adjust to what this Nets team was. And it's something that I really wanted to get a long number posted on the Nets to miss the playoffs. And it just isn't the case. They're plus 390 to miss the playoffs on DK. I thought we were going to get like Nets like plus 1,500, plus 1,600 to miss the playoffs, which is something I would have been interested in. Plus 390. I don't though. But just looking up the current numbers right here to what you referenced, the only thing that it would give me pause is I think that Joel Embiid is pretty live to get injured at any point in time. And that would obviously help the Celtics. And I also think that there's no real need for the 76ers to have to push Joel Embiid if he's not 100% down the stretch of the season. So if I had to pick one team to bet, it would be the Celtics at plus 340. But I also think adding James Harden is such a big regular season benefit to the Philadelphia 76ers. And I tend to think some of James Harden's lacking play in the last month or so with the Nets has less to do with him being over the hill and more to do with him just not wanting to be there.
Yeah. The other thing I'm looking at here for this division is the Raptors are essentially tied with the Celtics, and this can get into Eastern Conference and Finals futures. But despite the fact that the Raptors are more than double the odds of the Celtics and have virtually the same record, I guess what you're implying there is Boston is far enough better than Toronto that even though they're really in the same place right now, and even though Toronto has plus 750 odds and Boston's only plus 340, you'd still rather take the much lower number on Boston just because the Celtics are that much better than the Raptors?
Yeah, that's how I feel. And also, I really like the addition of Derek White. I think he's really good. I think that's going to be a pretty big upgrade. And then the other thing that really concerns me about the Toronto Raptors is just the minutes that they have had to play their core guys to get to this point in the season to where they've been in the playoff mix. It's just not sustainable. We've seen regularly Pascal Siakam is playing 40 plus minutes. Fred VanVleet has played so many minutes that he's frequently had to miss games with knee soreness in recent games. And Nick Nurse has acknowledged this as such. He was doing an interview with the media about a month ago now, where he said, I'm playing my guys too many minutes. I want to take the foot off the gas pedal. I'm going to play a deeper rotation. It was a lie because the coaches don't tell the truth to the media. But here's what he did with Pascal Siakam, the games right after he told the media that I'm playing my guys too many minutes. They're struggling to stay healthy. I have to cut back their playing time. The next 3 games after that, Siakam played 39 minutes, 43 minutes, and 57 minutes in a double overtime or triple overtime game against Miami. So the minutes aren't going anywhere, but at the same time, I just don't think over the course of an 82 game season, I don't think that's going to look good in the last month of the year.
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess the devil's advocate to that is they just had the All-Star break and there's only 24 games left and they're right there in terms of the standings. So maybe they're a little more well-rested now and we don't see that fatigue re-emerge until another couple of weeks from now because they just had a week off. So by that point, they might be so close in the standings that getting plus 750 on a division where like all the teams are pretty much right there. Philly's, I think 3 games ahead, 2 games ahead of Toronto right now. Okay, it's in the middle of those 2.5, but still that's close enough where like Toronto can just kind of luck their way into winning it. I think, even though everything you said, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I still think if I had to pick one of these teams, it would be Boston. Still, overall, is a pass for me. Toronto's close enough where if they did win, it wouldn't be the most surprising thing in the world. I just don't think it's all that likely, and it is a little concerning to me that Fred VanVleet is on the injury report still coming out of the All-Star break.
Yeah, that's true. He missed the last game prior to the All-Star break. They still won in Minnesota, which was, I guess Minnesota was on a back-to-back coming off an overtime game. We'll see all these teams a little more well-rested, but for sure, it's definitely an issue with just how many minutes Toronto's played over the course of the season. Okay, we have a few more categories to get to. Maybe we should go over to make and miss playoff odds and talk about the Lakers a bit. Before we get there, are there any other divisions that look appealing to you? I mean, Memphis is a huge favorite. Phoenix is a huge favorite. Miami is like a few games away from clinching already. So like there's nothing really there. And then Utah and Denver. Utah is more than a 10-1 favorite too. I mean, to me, I think Denver's still a little bit live. I don't think Golden State's really live. And I don't think Dallas is. Are you just kind of staying away from that whole thing? Or like maybe the Nuggets at plus 650, they're only a couple games behind Utah. Maybe that one is still something that's appealing a little bit.
Not as much for me, although we did get a report yesterday that Jamal Murray is expected to return sometime in March. He's going to be on a restriction. So it's not going to be something that, Jamal Murray comes back and immediately plays 30 minutes per game or anything, but it is a little bit of a boost to Denver. The thing that really concerns me, though, is that even though the gap is only, 2 games, a lot of that was because Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert missed a lot of time. The Jazz were so bad without Gobert and Mitchell. Now that they're healthy again, they're just going to start winning games again.
Yeah, and Utah does already have the season series locked up. So the Jazz are 3 full games ahead. It's 36-22 for Utah, 33-25 for Denver. So that's really like 3.5 games. I think Denver still could do it, but yeah, like the odds are probably not high enough to justify it. So maybe when we'll get into conference and finals betting, like maybe the Nuggets are more interesting there because if they get Murray healthy for a playoff run, like at that point they could win a series. Like that team is probably up there in the Western Conference if they have him and maybe Michael Porter plays. I guess that's at least a possibility still. But yeah, let's talk about the Lakers because we still have, I think, interesting things to say about them making or not making the playoffs. We have, let me just double check this. I think minus 110 both sides for yes is plus 100 and no is minus 130. We've now reached the point where the odds are finally saying what we've been saying the whole season, where the Lakers are more likely to miss the playoffs than make it. I honestly think there's value on the no at minus 130 still. Does that seem crazy to you, or do you think that that's mostly still accurate?
No, I think it's still accurate. This one. The other thing too is, so I've been thinking about the Anthony Davis injury as of late. I don't even know it matters because the Lakers are still going to make.
I agree with you.
They're gonna make the play-in game at this point. The bottom of the West is so terrible. The only way it matters if he's not available for the play-in game, that's obviously a massive issue. And so maybe that should be something that plays a factor. But other than that, the Lakers are stuck in this play-in scenario. This is where they're going to be. And the Anthony Davis injury doesn't change that. It doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden going to start winning or losing more. They've already sucked this year. They're not going to all of a sudden fall off a cliff. And they're not going to fall off a cliff to the point where they're going to miss the play-in game, and they're going to have AD back for the play-in game. And then it just comes down to, can they beat whoever they come across in the two play-in games? Can they win 2 games in a row? Maybe, maybe not. I tend to think that they're probably going to be favored now in both of those games, just because the bottom of the West is so terrible now and everybody keeps getting hurt. And I know the Lakers are dealing with injuries of their own also, but now let's look at their potential opponents. It's going to be, so if the season ended right now, they would be playing a home game against the Portland Trail Blazers. I think both of us would feel pretty good that the Lakers should be favored in that game, correct?
Yeah, if that's a game assuming that the Lakers are the 9 and the Blazers are the 10, because that's the other thing, right? Like if that's flipped, Portland can be home. But assuming the Lakers are 9, yeah, Lakers are probably 5-point favorites or something for that game.
Yeah, so we've got the Lakers at home against Portland. I would feel pretty good about them winning that game. And then we've got the Timberwolves against the Clippers. The Lakers end up playing the loser of that game. Kawhi Leonard, Ty Lue's already said that Kawhi Leonard isn't going to play this year. And then we're expecting an injury update on Paul George, I think in 2 weeks, which that would be pretty significant in terms of the Lakers' odds to beat the Clippers or not. Because the other thing too that kind of sucks about this home way thing, especially because you and I have both been on the Lakers missing the playoffs. If the Lakers play the Clippers in the second play, that's essentially a home game for the Lakers. There's going to be more Lakers fans there than Clippers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you kind of have to just admit that. Well, we actually do have these 2 teams. I'm just double checking this. The Lakers are playing the Clippers on Friday. The Lakers are technically the home team, and the Lakers are only -1. There's no Davis, so that would be a different thing. But that gives us some indication as to what the betting line would be for a head-to-head going forward. These 2 teams did play recently also, but I think LeBron was out for that one. Davis played, but LeBron was still out. In that game, the Clippers were -4 as technically the home team. But if you get Paul George back, that moves the needle probably. I think in my mind, it moves the needle more. Well, I shouldn't say that. Paul George is better than Anthony Davis at this point in his career, but the rest of the Lakers are so bad that Davis is probably more relevant to the Lakers than George is to the Clippers, because the Clippers can slot in guys who are actually decent, and the Lakers have to play like Stanley Johnson, Trevor Ariza, and Dwight Howard when Davis is out. So maybe Davis does matter more. I guess the only thing that the Davis injury really matters for, assuming he's back, is that the Lakers would be in the top half of the play-in or the bottom. Because if they had Davis, we'd have a realistic possibility for them to pass the Clippers, and then they only need to win 1 game. So that's like, I truly think, and it seems like you probably agree with this, that's the only thing that matters for it. They're not falling to 11. They'd have to get passed by 2 of Portland, New Orleans, San Antonio, and Sacramento. 2 of those teams would have to pass them. And those teams are all like 2 to 5 games behind, and there's just not that many games left. And none of those teams are good anyway.
So the other issue too is, so Portland, I don't think Dame's returning this year. That seems to be what their moves at the trade deadline indicated when they traded away CJ McCollum. The Spurs, they were sellers of the trade deadline. They gave away Derek White. As for the Pelicans, I thought the Pelicans were live, and I guess they still are to an extent. But we also just found out that Zion Williamson is potentially going to need a second foot surgery, which could mean he misses next year, at least parts of next year as well. We've got the Kings. They traded for Sabonis. I don't think that they really improved by swapping Halliburton for Sabonis. And they're also 3.5 games back at this point. So it seems like whoever the Lakers are going to play in that first round, assuming that they're the 9 or the 10 seed, it's going to be a pretty favorable matchup for them, because those other teams are all really terrible.
Right. So there's one way to look at this. You could say, okay, the Lakers are going to win the first play-in. You just like check off that box. And then you say, are they going to win the second one? And if it's a Paul George-less Clippers team, they're probably favored. I don't think there's a scenario where the Lakers are favored in Minnesota, though. The Wolves are a better team, I think, than the Lakers, even if Davis is healthy. And then it's a game in Minnesota. Like, they're more likely than not to lose that game, I think, under all scenarios. But the other thing is, like, just because they're favored to beat Portland or San Antonio or New Orleans or wherever it is, doesn't mean they definitely win. Like, people look at this wrong. It's still probabilistic. They may lose it. That's a 70-30 or a 65-35 kind of game. They could lose. Like, you don't stack probabilities that way where you just say this one's 100. They're definitely beating Portland. They may lose to Portland. And also Anthony Davis may re-aggravate something. LeBron may re-aggravate something. They have no chance if they miss more of, like, if they have to play the play-in with one of those two not healthy, or both of them, no chance is an exaggeration, but like the value on no playoffs at that point, if one of them is re-injured or if Davis is still injured, that's a lot of why I like this. And it's a lot of why both of us have liked it the whole season. Is it's just pretty apparent at this stage of their careers that Davis and LeBron can't really stay healthy for extended periods of time.
Yeah, LeBron's 37, and for this team to win, and he still plays at an MVP caliber level when he's, locked in and healthy, but that's just not as frequent now that he's 37 years old. He used to be an Iron Man who never missed games. How many times do we see LeBron in his prime roll an ankle and it looked really bad and he'd be dunking 30 seconds later? And that's just not quite the same recoverability that he has at this point in his career. But anyway, long story short, in terms of this number, I think it's about accurate. The Lakers are more likely to miss the playoffs than they are to make it, but the numbers reflect that at this point. And the bottom of the West is so terrible that I wouldn't feel confident laying minus 130 on Lakers to miss.
Yeah, I'm a little more, I guess, optimistic on them being bad. I guess I probably think it should be in the minus 150 to minus 200 range, but it's not like there's a ton of value left. I just think it is bettable here. I'm just not overly excited about it. The team I like in terms of playoff odds make miss at this point, the one that seems the best to me of these choices, because I do think most of them are fair, the Hawks plus 160 to get in. I just think John Collins can get healthy pretty soon, and that team just has a lot more talent than the other teams around them. Like the Cavs were favored, or the Hawks were favored by 2.5 against Cleveland last week without Collins. I think it's pretty clear that the Hawks are a better team than the Cavs when they're healthy. I think they're probably better than the Bulls. They're better than potentially the Nets, assuming the Nets are not, they don't have everybody. So I don't know. Is there another team, either if you like that one or another team here where you're looking at make miss playoff odds?
Not real. Like the Pelicans to me were a live one, but they're plus 600 now, and it doesn't look like Zion's returning. So nothing else really. I think the Hawks, like you said, they're a little bit too long. Probably. I'm concerned that Clint Capella looks pretty washed this year, but it's plus. Yeah, although
Okongwu has done okay stepping in. Like, how big of a drop off is that from Capella to Okongwu? Can they just like make that 1-for-1 change and they don't lose too much?
Well, that's what they've been doing. The minutes over the last, I don't even, like 6 weeks now have been like Clint Capella plays 26 minutes, Okongwu plays 22, or at least you just get somebody who's fresh out there. But the main reason that the Hawks elevated themselves to being one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference last year, like obviously Trae Young was really good, but their defense went from being a really bad defense to a really good defense just because they have Clint Capella anchoring them. And he hasn't been nearly the same player this year as he was last year. So that to me has been the biggest reason they've taken a step back. And I don't know that that is going to change, but plus 160 is still probably a little bit too long.
Yeah, I think it should be closer to 50-50. I mean, the best version of the Hawks right now might be John Collins playing center. And that's just a different dynamic. So we just kind of don't know how that functions in certain matchups. But yeah, I think like that one's probably close to 50-50. Okay, let's do the conference and finals odds. I think this is a good time to go back to the Celtics, and then we'll get to some MVP after that. Do you think the Celtics are still significantly undervalued to win the championship at 25-1? I do, but like, what are your current thoughts on that?
Not anymore. I mean, it was totally different when we were talking about when we bet them at 60-1 2 weeks ago when they first got Derek White. Yeah. Now I don't really think it's as much the case at this point. Now I just kind of think that it's normalized. Something else also is there's a lot of teams that have the ability to make improvements in the postseason relative to the regular season just by playing their best players more minutes. The teams like the Celtics, the Toronto Raptors, they don't have that ability because those players are already playing a ton. So I think Boston is right now a very good regular season team, but they're already playing Tatum and Brown so many minutes that there's not really a spot where it's not like they're going to be playing 45 minutes per game sustainably throughout the playoffs. Whereas we look at other teams, like whether it's the Nets might be getting Kyrie. Well, based on recent reports, the Nets are probably going to be having Kyrie Irving in home games very soon. And there's other teams that are going to be making improvements just by being able to play their core players more minutes that the Celtics don't have in the postseason.
Yeah, I think the Nets are the best example of what you're talking about, where the roster could just be much more condensed and focused on better players. Miami too, like Butler and Lowry and Bam can all play more in the playoffs. The Celtics are already playing their stars a lot. So no, I get that point, but I think even still, like that, the Celtics should be in the same tier as those teams. I don't know that. I mean, we can get into like the relevance of 538 player ratings and like how we want to approach that. And like, if that's just, maybe there's something that methodology of just rating each single player and then combining them all, maybe there's like a synergy element that's being missed in that mechanism, like in just that style of assessing a team. But still, like the Celtics have so many good players that it's hard for me to believe that they're significantly worse than a team like the Heat, right? Like if you want to say that the Heat are slightly more likely to make a finals run because once they start playing their stars more minutes, or maybe they have more depth and that's going to help them too. Like they have both things going for them. The Bucks have the upside if they get a little healthier. The Nets obviously have tons and tons of upside. But like, I think the Celtics, yes, you're right that they can't improve much from here, but they have so many good individual players on their team. Like Jason Tatum's been one of the 10 best players in the league this year, I think. And
I didn't think Tatum should have been an all-star this year, but that's a different
okay,
point,
so
I guess.
What is the, I guess Tatum's defense is hard to defense is hard to quantify. And maybe the thing is the Celtics are deriving so much of their value from defense, where you did say before, like team defense has lower variance, but maybe individual player defense, it's not that it's higher variance, that it's just more difficult to measure. So like Tatum, the Tatum being a top 10 player in the league, I think a lot of why I'm saying that is his defensive metrics are carrying him. But maybe that's, inflated because he's playing with other really good defensive players. Do you think it's like a lot of that kind of thing going on, where it's just these guys may not be as good defensively as they seem?
No, I think the Celtics have the second best defensive efficiency in the NBA right now. And actually, I'm going to retract one thing. I didn't think that Tatum should have been an all-star, like, what was it, about a month or so before the all-star game, but then he started to play better as they got closer to that. But I felt like Evan Mobley would have been a fine all-star pick over Jason Tatum. But that aside, the other thing too is, because we could bring in the 538 thing here, because you and I text about this a lot, and we can comparing the Heat to the Celtics. Between the Heat and the Celtics, how many players do you think 538 has in that series that would be better than Bam Adebayo?
Okay, I'm going to try to guess this without looking, but it's hard because there are a lot of guys that I know just offhand are close to him. So maybe it's only 3, but then there's probably like 6 others who are just short of him. Is that accurate?
It is. So the players that have a better player rating, at least just from the Heat side to start, Jimmy Butler does, Kyle Lowry does, and that is it from the Heat. From the Celtics, though, the amount of players that have a better player rating than Bam Adebayo is Tatum, Brown, Smart, Derek Williams, and Al Horford's almost the exact same.
Derek White, not Grant Williams, right? Or Robert Williams. Those names all just like blended together in my head.
Oh, Derek White is ahead of him. Yeah. Marcus Smart is ahead of him. Brown, Tatum, and then Al Horford's about the same.
So is your point here that Bam's being undervalued by the ratings?
I think Bam is being undervalued. And there's also a lot of Celtics guys that are being overvalued.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really like claim to know that players are exactly
they have Derek White as being significantly better than Jaylen Brown.
Yeah, well, if you go by they have a separate metric on wins above replacement, and that's why I wanted to go back to Basketball Reference, because I'm curious how this compares. But Derek White, by their wins above replacement metric, has been a top 20 player in the league so far this year. And Tatum's actually been, I think he's number 3 in WAR, behind Jokic, who's like Jokic is on the ceiling. You can't even compare anyone to Jokic. And then Curry, and then I think Tatum. There's like a whole group of players by their WAR metric where it's like Jokic is way up here, and then Tatum is in there with Curry, Embiid, Giannis, Van Vliet, actually, like a whole bunch of guys who are essentially tied for second. Does Basketball Reference, and I guess we could go down the rabbit hole of like finding all the different places, but we'll just stick to these two. Like where has Derek White been by that rating system so far this year?
Let's see. So I'm trying to go. It would be easy. Basketball Reference has the worst page ever for sorting stats. All right, so leaders, and then there's a million stats that come up.
We can build suspense. It's good. I mean, the Celtics, I think, are just very compelling, just the way that the season has progressed for them from being so bad to now, like, we're talking about them potentially being in the conversation for best team in the NBA.
I mean, I wouldn't put, I would definitely, there's a lot of teams that I would put ahead of the Celtics.
Well, the thing I would agree with for sure is the Celtics are capped at where they are. Like, they're capped at least my valuation of them. There's no way that I'm going to say a month from now, oh, the Celtics are actually even better than I thought they were. If you just go by like the ratings of their best players, they can't really get better from there. The Nets, though, can get way better. The Bucks can, let's say, like, Brook Lopez comes back or something. And then the Sixers, James Harden can fit a certain way. Like, all these teams have room to improve. The Celtics really, like, they're at their peak version of the team right now.
So actually, the Basketball Reference thing, which I also don't, they don't have Derek White projected. Here are the players on the Celtics they have ahead of Derek White. Grant Williams.
This is results so far this year, right? Just how they've played. So it might not be using all of his Celtic stats. They could be.
No, it does. It's them combined.
Okay. It's with the Spurs stats. Okay.
Yeah. So the best player on the Celtics per this is Robert Williams. Second would be Tatum, then Horford, then Smart, then Jaylen Brown, then Grant Williams, then Derek White.
I mean, there's no question these different methodologies are quantifying defense in very different ways. Offense, I think, is much like, it's more understandable what goes into offense, just like true shooting percentage and effective field goal and even plus minus to some extent. Defense, you can get very different methodologies from different places. So it's very hard. Like, there's a lot of ambiguity as far as like who's actually the best defensive players in the league. And is Derek White a top 10 guard defender, or is he just top 100? Is he just good? Is he merely good, or is he actually an elite defensive guard? I can't answer that question accurately. So I think ultimately we have to just say, like, we're not sure exactly how good these people are. We can make educated guesses and everything, but like really nailing down what we specifically think in terms of ranking players and teams, and primarily on the defensive end, because that's where it's most vague. Like, I just think we have to throw our hands up and be like, this is as close as we're going to get to assessing that.
Yeah. Well, I think they were undervalued at one point. Now I think they're about appropriately valued. Even if I sort it by just offensive win shares, though, they don't, like, Tatum is 47th in offensive win shares. Most of his value they have coming from defense. Derek White is 78th. Jaylen Brown is 143rd. So a lot of the Celtics value comes from their defense.
Yeah, I mean, even if we compared that to 538 for offense, it would probably be relatively similar. I think it's just the difference is coming a lot from defense. Like, Tatum is not, he's not grading as one of the elite offensive players. It's just the combination of being very good at offense and also very good at defense, but not necessarily elite at either thing. But just there aren't too many players who are well above average at both. That's essentially what's creating Tatum's value. But anyway, the player, well, we're going to have to talk about him specifically for MVP, but Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets, do you think that might be the team that is the most live as far as long shots to win the finals right now? Is the answer just no one, or like maybe Denver at 35-1? Like, that's something that's worth considering, just because we might have Jamal Murray back and we might have Michael Porter Jr. back. And Denver's already a pretty good team. So maybe that's the one to take the shot on.
So the reason Denver makes the most sense, just because we just got that confirmation that Jamal Murray is going to be playing within a month. And that would make me think that by the time the playoffs roll around, that he's going to be close to full health at that point. And Michael Porter Jr. earlier in the season, to what you said before, Michael Porter Jr. was ruled out for the season months ago at this point, but we also got a report about a week ago that he might be back before the end of the regular season now. So I do think that things are aligning for Denver to make a run in the postseason. But once again, one of those situations where they are close to the play-in scenario and things get kind of wonky because you could miss the playoffs once you get there. But that aside, 35-1, I think that's the best value of any team to win the championship right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I could argue Boston, but if we're just talking Western Conference specifically, it's definitely Denver. I don't think that there's really a conversation about anyone else. So, okay, we've covered I think everything in terms of conferences, divisions, player awards, make miss playoffs, except for MVP. So let's end on that. What, yeah, just give like your overall thoughts. Do you think there's anyone who's strong value? Is the market fair? Like, where are you at on MVP right now?
Yeah. So the one thing else right now, I think it's about fair. If I had to bet one guy, would be Jokic at plus 290. Is a lot of people are saying like, oh, DeMar DeRozan, Devin Booker, these guys should be in the what conversation? They should be in. Like people say these guys have to be in the conversation. But what is this conversation that takes place? It's either you're voting for somebody as the best, most valuable player in the NBA, or you're not. Devin Booker and DeMar DeRozan are both having really good years. They're going to be all NBA players. There isn't a world where they are on the same tier as Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, and Giannis. So I think the best value that anybody can get out of MVP is not betting guys like Devin Booker and DeMar DeRozan just because they have long-looking odds. Because you could play the season out 1,000 times. They're winning MVP in 0 of those scenarios.
Yeah, maybe it's 0.1 scenarios where everyone gets injured. Like that's really all we're talking about. I think there was a point. Well, we can also debate this too. Like getting Devin Booker at 60-1 just for him to move to 15-1 and then get 0 votes. Like you don't get anything for that. I mean, we can, cash outs are a thing and maybe you use it as a hedge because you've bet a bunch of other guys. I see it from that angle, but yes, I agree with you. Like Devin Booker, maybe he's a little different now because Chris Paul's out and like he could just explode in the second half and score 35 points a game and like actually be considered. DeMar DeRozan is playing as well as humanly possible for DeMar DeRozan, I think. Like if he's not in it now, I don't think there's anything he can do to get himself in it. Like this is so much more than anyone could have possibly expected from DeMar DeRozan this season. And still he's only 22-1. So yeah, I just don't like betting on him now seems crazy to me. But yeah, Jokic probably. Do you think this is similar to like Mike Trout for baseball, where it's just no one wants to give it to him because his team success is not at the level that it needs to be, and we're sick of hearing about him, and he's won MVP before, but like ultimately his numbers are so good and he's doing something so historic that he just has to, like, you just have to vote for him because he's so clearly the best player.
I mean, no, just because if you look at what Joel Embiid has done over the last, I don't know, couple of months now, like Embiid's been ridiculously good as well. So I think we're kind of splitting hairs between the two of them, but I do think that the odds on Joel Embiid are a little bit too short. I mean, Joel Embiid's almost even money now at this point, and a lot of Joel Embiid's numbers for the year, there's going to be some recency bias involved because he was so much better over the recent stretch of games than he was earlier in the year. And that's ultimately what's going to resonate in people's minds as they vote in the ballots. Because the numbers for Joel Embiid, this is what he did in January. In January, he made 54% of his shots from the field. He made over 80% of his shots from the line. He scored 34 points per game, 11 rebounds, also over 5 assists per game. So a lot of people are going to look at the more recent stats and kind of discount what happened at the beginning of the year. Whereas Nikola Jokic has gone in the other direction. He appears to have hit a little bit of a wall. And even though he's still playing really well, he's not playing as well now as he did in the earlier portion of the season.
Yeah, I think we might have had a situation recently where like the matchups haven't been as good and he's just had a couple like more human games than what he was having prior. Yeah, I mean, it's not like I'm saying that Jokic should be the favorite right now. I think he deserves it if that's a separate thing. Like who actually is most likely to get it? It's probably pretty close between Embiid and Jokic right now. And then the Jokic value just comes from his odds being more than double what Embiid's are. But we also have this James Harden dynamic. Well, first of all, the argument that the reason that Embiid is more deserving is because of the team success. That doesn't make any sense to me. The Sixers are 2 games ahead of the Nuggets in the standings. If they end up winning the division or getting the 1 seed or stuff like that, okay, fine. But at the moment, like Denver's right where the Sixers are. I don't think that argument really means anything for Embiid. So that's being used as a point that I just don't think is true. But then with James Harden, like Embiid's numbers have to take a hit while Harden's playing. I don't see any way that they don't, right? Like they're not going to just seamlessly integrate the pick and roll. It's not something Embiid's ever done before. We're probably going to get the kind of situation where they're just alternating going ISO half the game each. And Embiid's usage rate just has to come down. Do you think that's like a fair concern for his MVP candidacy?
Yeah, totally. And that was something also that because I know you and I both have Jokic. I don't have Embiid features. Do you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think when it would have. I basically took everyone when Durant got hurt. So
Okay.
that's why. Yeah. He was, I should have been more interested earlier. I think I got interested when he was around plus 500.
So it's hard for me to really make plays on Embiid just because I assume he's going to get hurt at some point. Like that's always in the back of my head. Well, Embiid's going to get hurt, and I think there's always, at the very least, I think there's enough risk of injury that it's hard for me to. It's not baked into the odds. The odds that Joel Embiid has right now, it discounts any chance of him getting hurt because the odds of him getting hurt, it probably happens 33% of the time or something based on even we've already seen him get hurt at one point in this year. Beyond obviously the COVID was hard. There's nothing he could have really done to control that. But he's also battled knee soreness. He came into the year with the knee injury that hampered him at the start of the year. So I always think that there's a possibility of him getting hurt that isn't taken into account for. If I was to actually line this how I think it should be right now, I would probably say like plus 250 for Jokic and plus 200 for Embiid or something like that. But either way, there's a lot of guys that are still in the picture. And then Giannis, if the Bucks start to play really well and they end up at the top of the East, I wouldn't be surprised if Giannis wins either. So there's nobody here that I would, once again, that I really want to make a bet on at these numbers.
Yeah, we don't disagree by too much. Like I think Embiid and Jokic, probably the fair lines for both are somewhere between plus 150 and plus 200. Like I think it's a little more likely for one of them than Giannis compared to what you said. I think voter fatigue is more of an issue with Giannis. And I think even if they finishes, let's say the 2 seed in the East, that will still have underperformed expectations just based on what people thought the Bucks were going to be before the season. So I think it's unlikely that anyone really views Milwaukee's regular season as a profound success unless they get really, really hot in the last 24 games, which I guess could happen, which is why I think Giannis still has a shot. But to me, Giannis deserves to be more like plus 600. I don't really think that he's in the same tier as these top two guys. Does Steph Curry have any chance? I mean, the All-Star game was pretty special for him, but I still almost feel like plus 850 is a bad bet. Like the way that his season has fallen off, I think he has sort of an anti-narrative going for him.
Well, and it's fallen off for a couple of reasons. Both of them injury related. One was Draymond Green being out, and the other is Klay Thompson returning. So Klay Thompson returning in itself is going to take touches away from Steph Curry. But when Draymond Green is there, there's a big difference in how Curry plays with and without Draymond Green. And his usage is actually higher when Draymond Green is on the court this year. The reason being is that Draymond Green is just good at facilitating. He kind of plays the point forward role. Whereas Steph Curry, when Draymond Green is out, dropping usage, a little bit of an increase in assist number, but then also just Klay Thompson coming back and him getting back up to speed and getting healthy after missing the last 2.5 years. That's also hurt Steph Curry. That and that the Warriors are starting to fall down the standings ever since Draymond got hurt. So there's a chance that Steph Curry win. I mean, we just already did that. He just hit 16 threes in the All-Star game, right? If he goes on a Steph Curry type run like he did in the second half of last year and the Warriors pass the Suns in standings, sure, it's on the table. He's just not all that likely to win.
Yeah, I think that's well said. It really does seem like, I mean, at least to me, it's mostly just two guys who can win it. I think Luka is still, just because of how good Luka Doncic is, I think at 30-1, there's a chance that he just has some crazy run in the second half. But as it stands now, like it's going to take a ton for him. It's probably going to be Embiid or Jokic. I think that pretty much covers all the different markets. We got through a lot of them. There's one more quick one that I'm curious what you think of, or if you've looked at this at all. There are odds up for scoring leader and points per game leaders and head-to-head points per game, stuff like that. Have you looked into this at all? Because Devin Booker potentially is undervalued here with the Chris Paul injury, and I'm not sure really how to quantify it. Like how many points can Booker average the rest of the year? But one thing there is a market, Booker minus 125 to finish the season, averaging more points than Jason Tatum. If there's one in there that seems semi-appealing, maybe it's that. But Booker's 70-1 to be the scoring leader in the NBA this season right now.
Let's see. So I think here's the easiest way to look at it is I'll just bring up what the basketball monster projections have right now, which do account for
Well, there you go.
Chris Paul being out. And I mean, they have, so Booker averaging right around 28 points per game for the rest of the season. It's obviously,
that doesn't feel like it's going to be enough to get him over the top. Yeah, I guess, right. That's not enough higher than what he was doing before.
no. And let's see, how much different does his usage look without, I'm just going to look at the on-off court numbers and take Chris Paul off the court and see how much of an increased usage does Devin Booker see. If it's a big number, then I think it would be worthwhile, but he has almost the same usage rate with Chris Paul on and off the court this year. So
yeah, I guess his assist numbers are probably what goes up, and that's really about it.
Yeah, it's little tiny increases across the board. Actually, it's funny. He scores less points with Chris Paul off the court than he does with Chris Paul on the court because he sees an increased usage but decreased efficiency.
Yeah, he probably gets a ton of double teams too.
So usage goes up, efficiency goes down, turnover rate goes up, assist rate goes up. It might even be a negative for him. I wouldn't consider him to lead the league in scoring.
If there's a bet on how many double-doubles Booker is going to have the rest of the year because of the assist increases, then sure, maybe it's that. Okay, well, that was the only market that I'm just kind of clicking through here that we didn't get to, so we can end with that one. Hopefully Jokic can get it together. I think for the sake of MVP, for the sake of maybe Denver, we're going to be interested in seeing that team just overachieve or do better in the second half of the season. That would be cool if the Nuggets can make a run in the playoffs. Anything else, or should we end it there?
No, I think that will do. We've covered pretty much everything. Actually, just to make this actionable, if you could only bet one thing of everything that's on the board right now, what would it be?
Okay, this is a good question. Let me see. Let me just do another quick scan of everything, trying to remember all of there's so many markets that we talked about.
While you're looking, I'll get mine is the Garland parlayed with JB Bickerstaff at 53-1 for Bickerstaff Coach of the Year, Garland Most Improved.
Okay, mine would have, if we were doing this yesterday, it would have been Robert Williams 50-1 for Defensive Player. Short of that, I mean, I don't hate the move that you're going with on the parlay like that. The correlation there does make sense. I think it's probably Montrezl Harrell for sixth man. Maybe it's because I already have Tyler Hero and Kevin Love, and this is functioning as a hedge. So maybe that's, I'm a little biased for that. But I do think like that, as far as long shots go, I could definitely see it where Harrell gets the Hornets into the playoffs, plays a really big role off the bench. He's already viewed as a sixth man candidate. He was a sixth man earlier in the season when he was on the Wizards, and he's won the award before, right? 2 years ago?
Harold, I think might have been 3 years ago. He's won it though.
Yeah. Okay. So people are there. It's probably long enough ago. There's not voter fatigue, but he at least has the reputation of being a good bench player, which I think will help a little bit. It would either be Harrell or it would be the Nuggets to win the West and to win the finals. Those are probably the two things I'm most interested in right now.
It was 2020. Harrell won sixth man of the year.
Yeah. So maybe he'll win it again. I still think it's Hero, but 65-1 is pretty crazy odds. Well, thanks, Greg, for doing this ridiculously comprehensive summary of all of the odds. This is what All-Star breaks are for. I guess, again, like last time, you can tell people where to find you if they want to see more of your stuff, because you were already tweeting about a lot of the things we talked about today, even before. So if people want to follow you and see more of your insights.
Yeah, so people could follow me at G Ehrenberg DFS, and you get everything from betting picks to B+ jokes to links to all the shows I do.
Yeah, the B+ jokes. That's part of the Twitter account, I think. All right. Well, good luck, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.